internacional.
Brazil categorically and with the greatest firmness rejects the armed intervention in Venezuelan territory in blatant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law. The bombings in Venezuelan territory and the capture of its president cross an unacceptable line. These acts constitute a grave affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela and set an extremely dangerous precedent. For the entire international community, the United Nations Charter establishes the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state as a pillar of the international order, except in the circumstances strictly provided for within it. The acceptance of actions of this nature would inexorably lead to a scenario marked by violence, disorder, and the erosion of multilateralism to the detriment of international law and institutions. The effects of the weakening of international governance and cooperation mechanisms are already evident. The record number since the Second World War of 61 active armed conflicts, the unprecedented figures of 117 million people in humanitarian disaster situation worldwide, reflecting the increase in wars, displacements, and crimes against humanity such as the genocide in Gaza, and the global increase in military spending, approaching the historical mark of $2.7 trillion. Such as Brazil has repeatedly stated, the rules governing coexistence among states are binding and universal. They do not allow exceptions based on interests or ideological projects, geopolitical, political, economic, or of any other kind. They do not allow the exploitation of natural or economic resources to justify the use of force or the illegal change of a government. A multipolar world in the 21st century that promotes peace and prosperity is not confused with spheres of influence. We cannot accept the argument that the end justifies the means. This reasoning lacks legitimacy and opens the possibility of granting the strongest the right to define what is just or unjust, what is right or wrong, and even to ignore national sovereignties by imposing the decisions that the weaker must adopt. Latin America and the Caribbean have made peace a conscious, lasting, and irreversible choice. The resort to force in our region evokes chapters of history that we thought were overcome and jeopardizes the collective effort to preserve the region as a zone of peace and cooperation, free from armed conflicts, respectful of international law and the principle of non-interference. The armed interventions of the past have had profoundly negative and lasting consequences. Contrary to freedom and democracy, those interventions produced authoritarian regimes and serious violations of human rights, leaving a regrettable toll of thousands of dead, political prisoners, tortured and missing persons, whose families are still today searching for their loved ones, as well as justice and reparation. For the first time in South America, there has been a deeply alarming event, an external armed aggression with the deployment of troops and bombings in a neighboring country adjacent to Brazil, with which we share more than 2,000 kilometers of border. Mr. President, South America is a zone of peace, I insist. We have maintained and will continue to maintain peace and non-intervention in our region with all determination. Moreover, Brazil does not believe that the solution to the situation in Venezuela involves creating protectorates in the country, but rather solutions that respect the self-determination of the Venezuelan people within the framework of their constitution. The events of January 3rd transcend the realm regional. The attack on the sovereignty of any country, regardless of the orientation of its government, affects the entire international community. This and other cases of armed intervention against the sovereignty of a country, its territorial integrity, or its institutions must be vehemently condemned. It is up to this Council to assume its responsibility and react with determination, clarity, and adherence to international law, to prevent the law of force from prevailing over the force of law. Brazil trusts that the future of Venezuela will be built by the Venezuelan people through dialogue without external interference, and within the framework of international law. Thank you very much.